You Can't Go Home Again were the words of American novelist Thomas Wolfe, and the title of one of his publications, encapsulating the idea that even if you went back to the house you lived in, on the streets you walked down, in the town you grew up in, it won't be the same experience, because you and the people you knew are irreversibly altered by time and life. Oftentimes we think of this place in terms of our past experiences with it. We have a snapshot, a thumbnail of a place as it was at one point in time, burned into our memory and cached into our mind. Sometimes we don't realize that just because something isn't changing with us, it doesn't mean that it isn't changing at all. I've had this feeling going back to my childhood home, sleeping in my old bedroom, with that dusty PlayStation on the shelf, the walls stained with tack marks from my long disintegrated Rey Mysterio poster. This is often linked to coming-of-age stories, which focus on the growth and change of a person. For people transitioning into young adulthood, part of that often means leaving home, or the realization that you will eventually have to, and the first step in realizing that you can't go back. Beyond the literal interpretation to the phrase, "you can't go home again," even if you returned home and everything was virtually the same, it is not the home you once knew. In Dontnod's original Life is Strange, you play as teenager Max Caulfield, moving back home from Seattle to her seaside hometown of Arcadia Bay. Going back to her roots, she once again inhabits the town she called home, visiting places she once knew and even reliving old memories. She's also enrolled in one of the top photography programs in the country, despite the fact that she takes selfies with an instant Polaroid camera, but I'm not going to go there in this video. But what is relevant is that Max has supernatural powers. She learns that she can turn back time. At one point in the game, you get the chance to time travel back to when you and your best friend Chloe were children, and knowing what you do now, try to stop things that you know are going to happen from happening. You tried to prevent her death. You tried to prevent her father's death. You pour this guy's beans all over the floor.
I was eating those beans! Ugh!
The game's premise is very much the theme of the butterfly effect, very clearly marked out in the opening. But more than that, it's the idea that even though you can literally rewind time, you can't go back. Not really. You are still the same person, who knows everything you know, has the experiences of all the things you've done. In trying to stop terrible things from happening, you've now seen terrible things happen in a dozen different ways, all while being in the unique position of having to process the consequences and mistakes of multiple lifetimes, ones that other people have no idea even happened. You can't revert back to a time before you were aware you had this power, before the burden of it weighed on you. Ironically, there is no going back to the person you were before. In the finale of the game, you are given a choice. Go back to the very beginning and allow Chloe to die, or stand back and watch your town be completely destroyed. The obliteration of your home, the culling of your childhood. Nothing will be the same after this, even if everything is. The ending of this game seems to represent the two extremes. One way you go back and everything seems exactly the way it was, but you are fundamentally irreversibly changed. Or the other being, your home is drastically different, even destroyed, or otherwise taken from you. This is a situation you'll find yourself in Road 96, where you take the role of a runaway teenager looking to escape the fictional authoritarian country of Petria. You'll progress along a randomized route across the country, bumping into recurring characters along the way, with the ultimate goal of getting to the border and escaping. The game begins by asking you a set of questions as you fly down a freeway at sunset before you begin your journey. There is a looming feeling that this is all part of something greater. There are a multitude of ways of getting across the country. You can hitch rides, walk, take buses, or steal cars. The eventual attempt to cross the border can be done in a number of ways too, which can result in you making it to the other side, being captured, or even killed. All for you to begin the journey again as a new teenager, running away from home on a randomized route to a new beginning, or their very end. Road 96 is different to Life is Strange. The first one, anyway. You aren't a teenager living in a peaceful town. Despite the game's colourful graphics, underneath its cartoonish hood lies the internal engine of a game about fascism. and the torment of having your home ripped away from you. Each encounter or area you come across in the game ultimately involves you moving on, closer to the border. There is no room to stop going in this reality. There is one particular encounter that you can have in the game. It's so small as to almost feel like a throwaway moment. But should you pass a payphone and have enough money, you have the option to call home, wherein you'll have a conversation with your parents, where they will actually spur you on to keep going and escape this terrible land to freedom. In this case, you quite literally cannot go home again. It now only exists in your mind as you seek to find another. There is actually a longer segment in Thomas Wolfe's novel, which I'll abridge for the sake of this video. You can't go home back to your family, to your childhood, to romantic love, to a young man's dreams of glory and fame, to excel, to lyricism, to singing just for singing's sake, to aestheticism, to one's youthful idea of the artist, to the places in the country, to the cottage in Bermuda, away from all the strife and conflict of the world, back home to the father you have lost and been looking for, to someone who can help you, save you, ease the burden for you, to the old forms and systems of things that once seemed everlasting, but which are changing all the time, to the escapes of time and memory. I noticed that while writing this and imagining home in this context, my mind didn't immediately go to where I live now, where I wrote and am currently reading this exact line, where I have lived for years. Instead it went home, to the place where I grew up, to the town I lived in, and the house with my parents. Wherever I may end up in the future, that place will always be my home, even though it might not remain as I know it. When I go back there, I consider it a break, a reset, something far removed from the stresses of everyday life. This doesn't often happen to me, but I saw this game being advertised on Steam, and there was just something about it. Despite not really knowing anything, I decided to buy it anyway. In Thirsty Suitors, you play as Jala, finding yourself on a bus, returning to her hometown of Timber Hills, to face her family and past demons. You're quickly whisked away into the inner workings of Jala's mind, which you naturally navigate via a skateboard. It starts off by asking some pretty personal, probing questions. You're then introduced to the cast of the ghosts of her past, as you begin to get the feeling she didn't leave home on the best of terms. But honestly, it's not as depressing as it sounds. This game is an insane, bombastic ride, bursting with colour, music, and a South Asian flair, which has you engage in epic psychedelic turn-based battles with your previous partners. I mean, just look at this. You reflect upon the person you used to be, confront lingering issues of the past, and just maybe become the person you were meant to be. These battles that you engage in are the literal manifestation of internal conflicts resolving themselves, and upon arriving back to your old house, you are treated to the comforts of home. There is this one minigame in particular where you prepare and cook traditional food in the kitchen to the approval of your mother, and more than anything, this just really emphasized that feeling of being home to me. The word home having a somewhat double meaning in this instance, both here in your childhood home and the homeland of your parents in Sri Lanka. The tension between the traditional old world and the new age of the second generation. The reason why Jala is back here is because life outside the nest didn't go according to plan. So here she is, back again. But she returns a changed person, just as she will leave a changed person. And, like many of us, will probably continue this loop until it ceases to be. I don't know exactly why, but these three games occupied a similar space in my mind. I guess they're all pretty similar in terms of art style. You play as teenagers approaching young adulthood, and all of them are set in these quaint, naturalistic, humble towns. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy game, much like the movie, was where we followed Peter Quill in a larger-than-life fantastical sci-fi trip, with all the trimmings of aliens, talking trees and raccoons.
Don't call me a raccoon!
And the dead heads of gigantic celestial beings being used as spaceballs, all set to a high-end G80 soundtrack. But much like its movie counterpart, the heroes in this tale are a ragtag group of misfits, who have been brought together through circumstance, all with their own traumas, and have been forged into a family through hardship. But nestled in amongst all of this is a memory of home. It's where the game begins, as a teenager with your mother exploring your old childhood bedroom. You flash back to this location at various points in the game, and eventually you experience the moment where Peter Quill is taken from his home by force and never returns. In the story's current day timeline, there is a religious cult leader seeking to enslave all others by brainwashing them with what's known as the Promise, which tempts them by showing them their deepest desires and making them helpless drones in spreading the message further across the galaxy. Inevitably, Peter becomes a victim to this and has to use only his willpower to escape. The promise that he is lured with is returning home and seeing his mother one more time. She is the same as she was, but he is as he is now. When I played through this section for the first time, something interesting happened. When Peter's mother hugs him, and he gets to hear all the things he wishes he could have for all of these years. During this cutscene, I paid no mind to it, and just sat and watched it played out. It's something that people who play games have done a million times over. We then skip forward in time. You're living back at home with your mother, except now you have the Guardians living there also. But as you begin to explore, cracks begin to eat away at the corner of your screen, along with a growing, undulating black growth. You are then faced with the game's end credits. You have succumbed to the promise. To win, to carry on with your life, you must accept that this isn't real. You must accept that this is no longer your home. And there is no going back to it. All of this stuff, like everything else, eventually has to give way to time. Anything else is a mirage, not to be trusted. When we think of the home we grew up in, we don't just think of the person we used to be, the life we used to have, but the person we thought we would be now. The question that follows is, what would we have made of us if we could see our present self? I occasionally go back to movies or TV shows from my youth and realise that when watching them now, just how much I didn't get the first time around, with my unripe brain not marinated in the experiences or knowledge of life. The movie or TV show is the same one I watched all of those years ago, but it's the way I see it that isn't the same. It's kind of like tasting flavours that you never had the capacity to register before. It's a nice thing to tell myself so I don't feel so old anyway. But for all of the games that I've listed so far, I have one more example that I think might have resonated with me the most. The World's End was the last in a trilogy of movies featuring the collaboration between Edgar Wright, Simon Pegg, and Nick Frost. The other two movies, Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, features Pegg and Frost playing characters with vastly different personalities. In The World's End, it's Simon Pegg's turn to play his most pitiful character so far, Gary King, an alcoholic approaching his 40s. We catch up to him attending an AA meeting, explaining to the group just how great his teenage years were, which is infused with the grainy clips etched from his hazy memory. One memory in particular is when him and his friends attempted what's known as the Golden Mile, where they have one drink in every pub for 12 pubs across their town. So desperate is Gary to recreate the glory years of their youth, he would eventually coerce and lie to get his reluctant old school friends into returning to their hometown and attempting the Golden Mile one more time. It becomes quite evident that they've all seemingly changed, apart from Gary. So this isn't an in-depth review of the movie, but I will mention that some pretty crazy sci-fi shit happens, and aliens try to replace humans with these robotic clones with blue blood. A statue comes to life and starts chasing them. It's a comedy like the other two movies are. But after all of the hijinks, the remaining friends finally make it to the last pub, something they failed to do when they were teenagers. And despite the world going to hell around them, Gary desperately claws for that final drink in their journey, the completion of this thing they were never able to achieve. He then utters a line which really broke my heart when I watched it for the first time.
It never got better than that night. That was supposed to be the beginning of my life. All that promise and fucking optimism. That feeling like we could take on the whole universe. It was a big lie. Nothing happened.
I suppose what hit me about this line was how close to home it was. The experience of leaving school with all of these grandiose ideas of all the things that could possibly happen, eventually becoming what could have been. Much like Max in Life is Strange, he is forced to watch from afar as his childhood home gets obliterated. As much as it's a story about the world literally ending, it's a story about the world ending for one person. Despite not being a 40-year-old alcoholic, I have in a way been this person. I have been in one of these pub crawls with my friends in our hometown years ago. I still have the crispy early-ish 2000s photos we took during it. Much like the world's end, all of that stuff we used to do, becoming just things we did once upon a time. Described beautifully by William Gibson, time moves in one direction, memory in another. In the end, the alien consciousness gives Gary King a chance to be young again, to live the life he had, what he has apparently cherished and sought out this entire time. And, well, one thing that I have noticed in all of these pieces of media that I've listed, the places that you call home, are surrounded by nature. It's a thread that links all of them. Is this why they all exist in the same space in my mind? Is there something to be said about an intrinsic desire to return to nature? It's as if these places are shielded from the outside world by trees and greenery, keeping the memories of the time before contained until you are ready to tread through them once more, representing a simpler time. Life is Strange's Arcadia Bay, which is seen differently in the intro screen of every episode. Road 96's Petria, although you have no home to speak of, you are surrounded by the stars and the sky and the desert. Thirsty Suitors Timber Hills, a sleepy town where everyone knows everyone, and Newton Haven in the World's End is probably one of the most idyllic settings you could possibly ask for. The quiet, sleepy homestead, on its face seemingly unchanged and untouched by anything evil or negative. When it comes to something being simultaneously different but the same, I can't think of a more suitable thing than nature. You can have a tree which stands in the same location for hundreds of years, but it has probably changed more than you can possibly realize. Much like the human body rids itself of cells, it's a continual renewal until it can't be renewed anymore. From our skin to our hair, all the way up to the nebulas in our cosmos that are light years in length. Nothing can stay the same, no matter how much we want them to. Everything changes. Every time we leave home, we're leaving something behind and taking something with us, microscopic specks of modification. And every time we return, we're seeing an altered version of it. It's only when you look back across a space of time that you can see the big picture, all of those tiny iterations. So next time you go back home, if you're able to, take a moment to absorb it all in. This is the last time you'll be able to. You can't come back here again. You know what else you can't return to? The like button being at 0, because I always like my own videos, just to get the ball rolling, and I figure why wouldn't I like something that I just spent all this time working on? The whole process of thinking of something to talk about, and all the things that can be related to it, and writing and recording it to completion, is the one I really do enjoy. And if you like these videos, thank you, and maybe you can consider subscribing, all of that jazz. And one thing people also say at the end of videos a lot is leave a comment, which seems to be just something that people say as part of the promotion ecosystem. But what I've realized recently is leaving comments can actually be really important and helpful. It can be a pretty daunting experience, uploading something that you've been working on for a while and wondering if people will watch it or enjoy it, or if there's some technical issue that you hadn't noticed, because you rewatch these videos so often while editing that you just become blind to certain things. So if you feel like you'd like to comment, please do, whether that be there's a problem with the video, or just to say, this was a cool video, you're a pretty cool guy. It does just help me to gauge the general response. And if you're really interested in the subject this video covered, I made another video relating to home and video games a while back. If you've watched this far, you're a real one. Thank you. And I'll hopefully see you in a future one.